Hi, I'm Michael Tabor, and I'm a product marketing manager at Sousa, and I'm here with Liz Herbert of Forrester.
Hi, I'm Liz Herbert with Forrester Research, and I'm one of the analysts on our applications team who's tracking some of the major shifts that we're seeing as companies in every industry are figuring out what it means to be a digital business.
Now, as you know, Forrester is a leading research firm for market and technology, and we're here in their Cambridge offices today to talk about digital transformation and some of the challenges that IT leaders are seeing, and also as it relates to their business requirements and also some of the newer technologies. So thank you for joining me today, Liz.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. So as you know, that there's been a fundamental shift in the way that business leaders are starting to look at their digital data, whether that's customer data or business operations data. What are some of the trends that you're seeing in this area as it relates to kind of a digital transformation or digital imperative?
Sure. Many of us have heard statistics such as data is more than doubling, every year now, and we have more data now than more data being created in the last year than in the entirety of history. And for a lot of our clients, what's important to them about that is what can they really do with that data. Most clients feel this pressure that there are new competitors coming into the mix, and that even companies from completely different industries are now evolving into new business models. For example, these connected car companies may become a threat to an insurance company. And so what we're seeing in the research we're doing is that companies in every industry are trying to figure out what it means to be a digital business. And in one of the recent surveys that we did, what they said is customer experience, agile business, and agility, and then finally cost are the top three things that they're thinking about when moving to business. And I know for some people that's surprising when you say something like cost has to be there as well. You always think of this massive change going on. But of course, they have to run the business at the same time and be profitable to survive.
Right, and it certainly is all about the business and what the business imperatives are. But how do these shifts basically impact the IT organization? What are the things that IT leaders need to be concerned about?
Sure, it's been a massive shift, perhaps the biggest that most IT leaders have seen in their careers, because what you're seeing is that the whole model for working has changed. You see the shift towards not just agile development, but really agile as a new way of thinking, as a new way of working. You also see that there's much more of a customer focus in many of the IT projects. So we're seeing clients think about, how do I do customer journey mapping, or how do I do design thinking before and throughout during these IT initiatives. And that's something foreign to many IT leaders. Some might even perceive it as fluffy and irrelevant to what they should be focused on, and that's a real cultural shift. But then we also see some very tactical changes going on. So the technologies are changing rapidly. There's, of course, more focus on automation and artificial intelligence and Internet of Things. And this requires new skills that most IT organizations don't possess today. So they're having to deal with these cultural issues, they're having to deal with methodology and process issues, and they're having to deal with skills that in most cases they don't have and struggle to find.
Yes, and I think they're also seeing a lot of complexity in the data center. One of the things that we recently have done over the last couple of years at Sousa is develop a software-defined infrastructure with the idea that infrastructures are becoming very complex with both physical and virtual compute, storage, and networking resources. And then that gets even more complicated when you consider some of the newer technologies that you just talked about, like, for example, IoT. Other things that make it more complicated too are the different delivery models that are available both on-premise and the cloud. And specifically in your space, in the enterprise application space, there's traditionally a lot of complexity as it relates to databases. Typically these applications have their own separate database for maintaining information. Those databases go into data warehouses. That information has to be extracted into a data mart, so you've got databases all over the place. All of those things together really seem to add a lot of complexity and make it difficult for businesses and IT organizations to be more agile.
Absolutely.
So at Forrester, one of your responsibilities is to kind of analyze the evolution of these enterprise applications. What are the things that you're seeing?
So one of the major shifts that we've seen, of course, is the shift to the cloud. This is taking over really every type of software. And that's surprising still to some of the clients that I speak with, is they felt that cloud would take off more in the fringe areas. But now clients, any decision related to an application, you have to at least ask the question, should this be in the cloud? And if so, what flavor of cloud? should we be thinking about for this particular application? And in pretty much every case, there's going to be a hybrid landscape where you're going to have some SaaS, some public cloud, some private cloud, and some applications that will, for the foreseeable future, remain on premises as well. But there are many other shifts underway as well. So when we talk about these future trends that are driving digital businesses, when you talk about data and analytics and artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, we see that the leading packaged application vendors are trying to evolve their portfolios to be able to support those. And for most of them, what we see is it's not a wall-to-wall story for the individual vendor. It's required these vendors to think differently too, that it's much more about an ecosystem. And so we see that they're investing in moving to those next generation technologies, but also doing that with a wider range of partners than what they used to think about in the past. So that's been massive. And for a lot of our clients, that's a new way of thinking. You know, we had clients throughout the early 2000s who thought about strategic vendors, wall-to-wall investments in those vendors, and they would always look to those key partners first. And now they're having to think in a different way to really evolve into businesses and support the technologies necessary for that shift.
Okay, all those technologies sound really good, but do you see this as kind of maybe a lot of vendor hype, or is there real value to the business
Right.
in implementing those?
Right. I think sometimes the clients I'm speaking with, they're so buried in the day-to-day operations. They've got, cost considerations, and especially in some industries, right? So you look at what's going on in most resources industries or oil and gas, they've got serious cost constraints right now that in many cases limit their ability to focus on innovation. But the broader shift we're seeing is that every business faces an existential crisis nowadays, that it's so easy for these startups to come in and disrupt, or like we said earlier, these companies from an adjacent industry changing their business models can create new pressures in the competitive dynamics. And so what we're seeing is that, not everything's going to change overnight, like most massive shifts we see in the technology sector, but companies who aren't thinking about this at all and who aren't, more importantly, acting on this, at least doing some pilots, at least starting to roll up their sleeves and get involved in these new technologies, they're at major risk in the future. And numerous studies, including some of our studies, have shown that those companies who are most aggressive in the shift to digital are the ones who are surviving. They're the ones who have the best profitability. And so, we strongly advise our clients to think about and experiment with these new technologies, even if they feel they're very far into the future and so bleeding edge that they won't impact them soon. What we try to encourage them to think about is that soon is going to happen a lot faster than they think.
Yeah, and I think one of my other areas of responsibility is with SUSE solutions for SAP applications. And I think SAP is probably a great example of the sort of thing you're just talking about. One of the things that they've been focused on for the last few years is starting to really simplify their own application infrastructure to make sure that all the applications run on the same user interface, to eliminate all those databases that I was talking about earlier and just run everything on SAP HANA, whether it's transactions or analytics. And also to simplify things into a single into a single operating system, that being Linux. So a lot of simplification there with the goal of helping these organizations to be more nimble and to be more agile in terms of their service delivery. But at the same time, also broadening things to support, for example, the cloud delivery, the on-premise delivery, or maybe hybrids, as you mentioned, being able to support extensible or being more extensible to support other features like big data, in addition to the existing analytics with SAP Vora or using SAP Leonardo to handle IoT. So I think that the point you're making there is that there's a lot of things. There are a lot of things that the vendors are doing to help these customers, and they need to go ahead and get going on that because SAP has a stated strategy that by 2025 everything will run on Linux.
Right, we see there's change, like you pointed out, it's at every level. It's in some of the surrounding technologies, be it the sensor technologies or for manufacturers, 3D printers and how those connect into an ERP system. We see a lot of shift in the applications, the user interface. Obviously, the shift to mobile has been huge. And then, like you said, in the infrastructure and in the database layer, this has a lot of shifts as well. And to your point on simplicity, I think it's one of the most important ones. You know, we're always faced with that dilemma of how do we evolve the business and focus on change while also managing cost and simplicity. And for some of the clients I've worked with, you know, the systems they've built up over the last decades are so complex and they're so costly that it's completely limiting their ability to innovate. And so they get into that dilemma where, you know, we see this regularly. They've invested so much, they've finally got these systems to a place that is workable, but it's not the right choice for their go-forward strategy. And for a lot of the clients I've worked with, that puts them in a very difficult decision, because the question is, should we throw out a lot of what we've just spent several decades getting together, or you know, should we try and hang on to it longer, knowing that might hinder us down the road? And so for a lot of them, they're trying to figure out what's the right balance there.
And in figuring out that balance, I think a lot of them are in fact starting to look to the cloud, as we've mentioned. I was recently at one of SAP's conferences, and we had a number of customers come up to our booth because they saw signs that talked about cloud. But they didn't seem to really be sure what it was that they wanted to do and what the direction they wanted to go in. What kind of guidance would you give to IT leaders who are thinking about on-premise versus cloud versus hybrid or managed services?
Sure. It's one of the biggest questions facing IT leaders today, and it's one that we're advising our clients on daily. You know, we often encourage them to think about it as more than just a deployment model. I know some clients I've worked with, they liken it to the days of ASP or even a hosting scenario. But really, when you look at this shift to the cloud, the standardization, the simplification, the scalability and flexibility that cloud enables is very powerful, and it's able to drive business models that wouldn't be possible with alternative deployment models. It's not just, you know, the faster ability to get up and running and the scalability, but when you look at cloud, because it is more standardized and more of a one-to-many approach in any public cloud model, including SaaS, vendors are able to innovate at a pace we've never seen before. So whereas many IT leaders can recall these, you know, 1.5 year long upgrade cycles that they probably didn't even apply right away, so we're looking at more like 3 to 5 years between upgrades. Cloud is a continuous stream of innovation, and so you look at what leading cloud vendors are doing. They're trying to make the cloud ready for IoT and for automation and for artificial intelligence. Most cloud products are inherently mobile, and they're trying to think about what that means and deliver that innovation seamlessly, automatically through this, you know, more trickle out effect of these upgrades that they're doing. So for a lot of clients I work with, they've got to think first about that rather than just a sheer cost analysis. It's so transformational to what the business is doing. And, you know, we usually advise clients that power can shine through more when you see certain characteristics. If it's a workload that is changing rapidly, if it's a workload that is collaborative inside and outside the company, and so you've got that property of real-time data and information sharing is prominent. If it's something where you see that there's massive scalability needed, that's another factor why you would probably look towards the cloud. But then you've got other realities that our clients are struggling with, such as, you know, security concerns, performance concerns. Network is still an issue for some of these workloads to really take off in the cloud. And so it's not a simple solution, though we see that this broader trend is more towards public cloud. Vendors don't necessarily have solutions available or tested or proven, or the security or the network or other issues like this are hindering the adoption there. And so you do see that hybrid landscape being the answer, and some of those properties around what exactly you're trying to do really drive for this workload, for this application, what's going to be the right mix for us.
Okay, and I think that's consistent with the sort of things that we've been seeing, especially in our SAP environments with our customers. Traditionally, we focused our products on trying to get the on-premise application, installing the entire SAP stack, not just the operating system, in a matter of hours versus having it take days. But because of this shift, we've been working very closely with SAP and all of the major cloud providers to make it very quick and easy to get those SAP environments up and running in the public cloud. So I think this is very consistent with, you know, the sorts of things that we're seeing with our customer set and the kinds of things that you're talking about there.
Sure, it's really important. I mean, we had a client recently complain because they were moving to the cloud and they had been promised all sorts of capabilities, and I won't name who the vendor was, but, you know, what they said is that to get some of the test environments deployed was taking a lot longer than they had anticipated. And so for them, it was sort of an unexpected slowdown in what they perceived would be a very quick and nimble model. So, absolutely, those characteristics you talked about are very much what clients are looking for. And this is another issue in the market is there's a lot of things being branded as cloud, but not all of them can deliver these same capabilities that, clients are ultimately expecting are going to come when you say the word cloud.
Okay. So these large enterprise applications, typically they're in the market for a very long time. I think customers like the stability, especially for something that they're literally running their business on. What kind of guidance would you give to some of these customers who have these enterprise applications and are wanting to start making that transition?
Sure. I mean, we always advise clients to start with the business case and really think about the business benefits. In fact, we have a model that we've come up with at Forrester that we call total economic impact, which uses cost as just one input. Sometimes I've seen these analyses go too heavy on cost, and you might be doing something more cheaply, but it may not be the most strategic for your business, which is going to create issues down the road. So business case, of course, is there, but we also advise clients to not get too mired in, analysis paralysis, right? So we're encouraging a lot of pilots, a lot of trials. Actually, you see the vendors are trying to promote this as well. There are many vendors out there who either directly or through their ecosystem partners are trying to work on more sandbox environments and trials and ways where their client base can really experiment with the new in a way that they perceive as not too disruptive to the day-to-day operations of the business. So we're really encouraging clients to think broadly about business change and to incorporate some of those new methodologies that I mentioned earlier while doing that, like journey mapping or design thinking, rather than just thinking about maybe process optimization or something that would have been more in fashion prior to the digital disruption era. But to be able to do that also while taking action and while getting moving, because we see these transformations are happening so fast. There's not a lot of time to spend 6 months doing a business case anymore, and that's been a massive shift going on in the market. So.
Yeah, and I've certainly seen SAP do that in the shift from the traditional NetWeaver environments moving to SAP HANA and then ultimately the SAP S/4HANA environment. They've laid out roadmaps depending on where you are and where you need to be. To kind of get started with that. But I think the piece that you're talking about in terms of how to build that business case and how to look at the total picture and not just the costs. Because in a lot of cases with this level of migration or transformation, the cost upfront may be significant, but you'll find the payoff is significant as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's very hard for companies many times to really analyze what this transformation will enable them to do. I mean, doing these business cases on something like the shift to IoT or the shift to more advanced analytics can be very tricky because there are a lot of unknowns in those equations. So often it's hard to do, but well worth it to think about it more in those types of parameters.
And we try to help with, even at the operating system level, to help with the transition. Specifically in the case of SAP, we've added things to make it easier to work with the existing Microsoft environment, for example, to leverage some of the resources that are already there. Also providing guides, providing training for people who are traditionally maybe Unix administrators or Windows administrators to get more comfortable working with Linux. So let me ask one final question. If there was one piece of advice that you'd give to an IT administrator or to an IT executive in terms of getting started with the transition, what would it be?
I would say it's to be open-minded. I think a lot of the clients that I've worked with over the years, the hardest thing for them, like any human, is change, right? And so, it's one thing to talk about these new technologies are on the horizon or the business is going through a massive shift, but a lot of times when the individual is thinking about what it means for them, it's very hard to completely reinvent oneself or to acquire those new skills that may be so different from what you've spent sometimes decades building up in your career. And I think that's the hardest thing that individuals as well as organizations are struggling with. And one of the things we talked about in a recent research report I worked on around the shift to digital and some key mistakes we see companies making is throw out the rules. We just continue to run into individuals and organizations who will say, well, we can't do this because of this rule we have or this policy that we have. And of course, rules and policies have their place in keeping an organization, within a reasonable amount of risk. But on the other hand, if you're working out of a rule book that is out of date, you'll fall behind inevitably. So that's been one of the hardest things, and it really gets to that idea of cultural shift, organizational shift, beyond just the technology skills and the specific, languages or applications or infrastructure elements that an individual has to familiarize themselves with, and that's often harder to do in practice, of course, because we are all creatures of habit. So.
Right, and we see that with the shift, especially from the Windows and the Linux environments to over to Linux, that it's very important to go ahead and start thinking about what you're going to do right now. Go ahead and get started now. As you were saying earlier, it seems like there's a long time before they'd have to actually make that transition, but 2025 will be here as quickly as, even quicker than you can imagine. So going ahead and doing that piloting, doing the planning up front and getting started sooner probably would yield a lot of benefits there.
Absolutely, and that's one of the big shifts in approaches from most major IT leaders who think about the traditional waterfall approach to doing projects, and that is something we see more and more they can do, is pilot, experiment, and we encourage them to do something like that because that's the way they'll survive, but also it's the way that IT work is getting done now and in the future as well, so it's good to adapt to those new ways of working.
Okay. Well, thank you, Liz. This has been a really good conversation, a lot of good advice, a lot of good insight into some of the things that you've been doing from a research perspective and things that you've learned from customers. And I think that one of the big takeaways that our customers want to get and our viewers want to get from this is to go ahead and get started now. Start thinking about it now. Go ahead and start the planning. And to our viewers who may be starting to plan their digital transformation, we thank you for your time and wish you the best of success as you start your journey.